Welcome, 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 everyone. Thank you for joining today's session. For those of you that are just joining, my name is Crystal, and I'm your host for today's session. Today's session is, or this portion session is called Let the Body Speak, an Embodied Approach to Parts Work with Dr. Ariel Schwartz. And with that, please let me introduce you to Dr. Ariel Schwartz. She is a clinical psychologist and leading voice in the healing of trauma. She is an internationally sought out teacher and author of 7 books, including the Complex PTSD Workbook, the Post Traumatic Growth Guidebook, EMDR, Therapy and Somatic Psychology, and Applied Polyvagal Theory and Yoga. As the founder of the Center for Resilience Informed Therapy, she offers a mind body approach to therapy for trauma and informational mental health and wellness updates through her writing, public speaking, social media presence, and blog. She believes that the journey of trauma recovery is an awakening of the spiritual heart.
Hi, lovely to be here with you. I am here today, as Crystal already mentioned. My topic for today is Let the Body Speak, an embodied approach to parts work. I actually just sat in on Frank's session as well. And I'm super excited to go right after his session because I feel like it's just a lovely segue into what I've got for you all. There will be options if you so choose to get up out of your seat. I know for some of you, hi Laura, I know for some of you it's evening, right? For those of you coming in from the UK or from Europe. So you get to opt in or opt out to anything that I offer, but we will have an opportunity today to perhaps get up out of our seats and do a little bit of embodied movement practice with parts work. So I have some slides that will lead us into that. And before even we go into that, I actually brought with me a card. Some of you know that I published the post-traumatic growth deck, and it goes along with the post-traumatic growth guidebook. And I chose a card for today's class. One of the reasons why I chose to bring the card deck in for today is that sometimes it can be a really powerful way of theming how we might work with parts of ourselves. And also, if you're a therapist or a coach and you're working with others, it's a tool where they can choose a deck or a card from the deck at the beginning of a session as a way to deepen in. Now, the card that I chose for today is uh, kind of an interesting one, and maybe again in the context of what Frank was just speaking to. It's the card on shadow work. And I think that often when we're deepening into a part, when we're turning towards distress, whether that's somatic distress, whether that is emotional distress, that we're turning towards elements of us that sometimes hold the parts that we don't always want to bring to the light, that we don't always want to acknowledge are us. That's why they get relegated off to parts, because it's hard to feel shame, or it's hard to feel our fear or our anger or whatever the emotion might be. And maybe we got messages from people in the past that said, I can't handle your anger. I can't, I get dysregulated when you get afraid, and I get afraid too. And so I'm not a co-regulator. I'm not able to really be present with you. So sometimes I find that we're doing when we're doing parts work is an element of shadow work. We're turning towards the unknown, we're turning towards the uncomfortable, and we're willing to shine some light on that. So the card of shadow work, and the something else, if again you don't know my card deck, that they're all accompanied with photographs. So these are my own photos, and this is the card chosen for the shadow work, if you can see it there. And this particular photo was taken while on a hike in southern Utah here in the US. And this kind of striking, very almost kind of beautifully bleak scene, if those words could be paired together. The way in which the kind of skeleton of a tree is sitting in a dry wash, and there's something powerful and evocative about turning towards things that may feel bleak, but maybe finding the beautifully bleak inside of us as well. So here's the reading that goes along with this card. Shadow work. The desire to avoid peering into the darkness is normal. It is human instinct to move away from pain. However, getting in touch with hidden parts of yourself is an important step in healing from trauma. The shadow can live within your body and your psyche. It can arise as grief, faulty beliefs, vivid dreams, or patterns of tension, pain, and illness. Your shadow needs to be brought forward into the light of your awareness so it does not become a blind spot in your life. Gather your courage. Call upon your allies. You have been preparing for this moment. And I also brought with me today a poem that to me kind of encapsulates maybe a bit of the power of the other side. Like once we get in touch with that which we have relegated as maybe unlovable or untouchable within us, unacceptable. And once we get in touch with that and we begin to bring that to the surface, we tap into something that is profound. It's sometimes when I talk about parts work, I use this metaphor of the beach ball. Some of you have heard me use this metaphor before. You're nodding, Annie, right? And it's basically like taking everything that we don't want to feel and we are working hard to keep it out of conscious awareness. So we're pushing that down. But it takes energy to push something down and to keep it out of awareness. To not feel actually is sometimes more exhausting than to just let the wave of emotion come all the way through and out. That energizes us. And if there are any of you that embodied that anger with Frank or embodied fear or even shame, ultimately, when we meet ourselves where we are, there is something profoundly freeing about that process. Um, so this poem, for me, it's a poem that I wrote, and it's a poem that came out of a deep process, a deep personal process. I was kind of, again, watching Frank's session and kind of overhearing the conversation and that kind of vulnerable share from Haleen. I'm not sure if you're still here, but that very tender exchange and the way in which, like, the that we often are sitting on both sides, like the requirement that as we're essentially going to be someone that's going to hold space for others or be a co-regulator or a therapist or a coach or whatever your role is, if you're serving in that capacity, that it requires that we do our own work. I love that I have my mom here because she's modeled that for me. Like that's something that's really meaningful for me is Mom, you are a psychologist. You've lived your whole life really committed to your own inner work, and it's paved so many paths for me to really trust the inner depths of my psyche because you've represented that, and you still do, and that's pretty cool. So the other thing that maybe I'll kind of name around that is that gets to be lifelong learning for all of us. Yeah. So how beautiful. All right, so this poem is called The Voice is a Portal. The Voice is a Portal. This is the reclaiming of my voice, the voice that got lost, the voice that quieted when the world was hard, the voice that was confused, the voice silenced in shame. This reclamation is for the voices of all of us who have felt voiceless. All whose grief has been trapped in the frozen scream of fear. Like all sacred journeys, this too is a pilgrimage. From head to heart, the voice is a portal. Like all sacred journeys, this too is a pilgrimage from head to heart. The voice is a portal. The throat, a passage, a gateway to the center of compassion. I remember the first time that my heart consciously poured through my voice, taken by surprise at 15, singing among hundreds of voices on sacred lands. The singular self dissolved into a landscape of sound. I didn't know I could be lost and found at the same time. I didn't know I could be lost and found at the same time. I honor the one in me who forgot herself. Caught in a webbing of self-doubt, she too has been a great teacher. Caught in a webbing of self-doubt, she too has been a great teacher. This life, an ever-repeating game of hide and seek, forgetting and remembering. Each cycle of change brings a deeper knowing of truth. Each an unfolding flower, petal by petal, opening to love. As I let go of seeking, I discover that I've already been found. As I let go of seeking, I discover that I've already been found. And as I let go of grasping, I find that I have all that I need. There is nowhere to go, there is nothing to do. Surrounded by beauty, I sense the divine nature of all. The voice is a portal. Listen. This voice is both soft and strong. Trust, for she knows the way. She is love yearning for love. She is calling you home. The voice is a portal. Listen. This voice is both soft and strong. Trust, for she knows the way. She is love yearning for love. She is calling you home. And I'll invite you to allow those words to wash over you in however they resonate or don't. And perhaps in your own way to explore what your intention is for this precious time that we have together. What you would like to get out of this, knowing that there's some learning didactically, a few slides, and there's also some opportunity to embody experientially, maybe to give voice to a part of yourself, give expression. So across the next hour or so that we have together, I'm going to spend maybe 25 minutes or so doing some slides. We'll kind of get those out of the way. And then we'll do about a 20-minute experiential. And I'm hoping to really give some interactional time at the end just to see how this lands for you and to kind of feel into our global community that's here together. So that's a little bit for your nervous system about what to expect. I'm going to go ahead and bring up a slide deck, and just for your curiosity about the poem, for those of you that are like, oh, I'd love to read that again, it's in there. So you have access to my slides. So here is our topic for today, Let the Body Speak, and another one of my photos. So I typically use, as often as I can, my own photographs for my slide deck. And those are the same photos that go in the post-traumatic growth deck. So a little bit of the flavor of that. This is the poem, and it's there for you once again. And we'll go into this topic of embracing inner complexity. Embracing inner complexity, that parts work helps us recognize that we all have different states of mind and emotion. And when I teach about parts work, there's this intersection between the language that I like to use about framing parts or talking about parts as simple as possible, so that it doesn't feel like we have to go into our heads. This was one thing I appreciated about Frank's talk is, that a lot of the traditional approaches to parts work out there can actually get kind of heady. And you have to try and figure out, is this a manager? Is it an exile? Like, what am I working with? And so I'm going to share with you some of the complex models that help us understand our internal system. And especially for me, as someone with and someone who has worked with complex PTSD in clients and has written books on that, I think parts work is almost always a component of the healing process with complex PTSD and dissociation. And so we'll talk some about how we embrace inner complexity, talk about it in a way that becomes less confusing, and really kind of see this as it exists within ourselves and also people that we work with. So, very often, because we have different states of mind and emotion, we often have competing needs that can become polarized within us, like the need for connection and my need for independence. The part of me that loves someone that I'm close to, and the part of me that sometimes can be so angry that I want to say, I hate you, right? Like, how can we have those two experiences or multiplicities of experiences inside of us? The part of us that wants to stay safe and the part of us that's ready for growth. These are all very normal feelings. And when those parts of us get polarized inside of us, it can contribute to anxiety or indecision or procrastination or self sabotage. The other thing that I love about parts work is it recognizes that the human mind is profoundly capable of navigating our conflicting thoughts, feelings, and needs. So when we do get into kind of working with the internal mindset, and my work is a mind-body approach to trauma treatment, and we don't want to throw away the great value of the mind and meaning making. Our mind is such an asset to us, and is capable, as Frank said, of imagination and contemplation and reflection and refinement. The mind is just an extraordinary thing that we're endowed with, and it helps us to navigate those conflicts inside of us and the conflicting thoughts and feelings and needs. So here's where the language gets a little fancy, but I'm going to invite you to hang in there with me. So the initial work that I've done in parts work trainings has been both in Gestalt. I've been training in Gestalt for, I don't know, some 15 years or more. And I've also worked with supervisors and people whose work I deeply admire, like Janina Fisher, or one of my EMDR consultants, a man by the name of Jim Knipe. And these individuals were very, very influenced by this particular model, Kathy Steele being again, another incredible influential teacher in the world of complex PTSD. And this is the structural dissociation model. And it basically says that most of us have emotional parts that are sometimes hard for us to feel. Lessons that we learned in childhood that maybe our emotions weren't always fully welcomed by others or so forth. And that when that happens, those emotional parts of us get kind of relegated off. Those would be the emotions or the sensations in our bodies or memories associated with the unresolved events of the past or unresolved trauma. And in order to keep those emotions out of our conscious awareness or those sensations away from our conscious awareness, most of us develop some kind of defense strategy. That defense strategy might be the excessive need for control or to manage everything. It might be the desire to kind of towards perfectionism, like if only I have it all figured out, if only I've got it perfectly lined up, then I don't have to feel that messiness. Maybe it's if I idealize the people that hurt me or situations of my life, I don't have to actually admit to myself how harmful they were. So I might idealize a member of family of origin and keep them up on a pedestal because to actually confront that they were hurtful may have been may actually be too confrontational for our kind of overall sense of self. Sometimes we go into what we would call intellectualization, where basically I just go up into a lot of thinking mind in order to avoid the felt sense of the body or to be with my emotions. And other ways that we push our emotions out of conscious awareness might be through addictive behaviors, whether that is compulsively scrolling on social media, whether that is through food, whether that is through substances, whether that is through relationship patterns. It can show up in a lot of different ways as basically kind of self-protective strategies to not feel. So the more that we push that beach ball of our emotions under the surface, the more that we will start to feel like we are just going through the motions of our lives. We're stuck in what the structural dissociation model refers to as the apparently normal part. It's kind of funny language, but it basically means that I'm in a world-facing part, or as Janina Fisher says, I'm on the part of me that learned how to go on with normal life as if I was okay. But I actually don't feel whole inside. I feel compartmentalized. I feel cut off from my emotions. I feel cut off from my body. And that can lead to confusion and disorientation. So, this is what we would call a kind of model of primary dissociation. And what's powerful about this particular model is that it allows for even greater degrees of complexity in what we would call secondary or tertiary dissociation. And in this model, um, we would start the same. We would have that kind of facing normal life part or acting as if part. We would have some quality of our defenses that are keeping away our emotions from conscious awareness. And this, once again, is that primary dissociative pattern. Let's say that the primary emotion here is my longing for connection, carried by a very young part of self that is needing attachment for survival, that is carrying within me a kind of cry for help. And that's very vulnerable. Again, a very strong reason why we might push that down under conscious awareness. I'm not ready to feel that. I don't have the capacity to be with that. So I push it away. And now let's look at secondary dissociation. Maybe another emotion that I push out of conscious awareness is fear, or my fight part, my anger, my flight part, my urge to get away. And that emotional part is carrying a lot of sympathetic nervous system activation. It's very much in fight, flee, knowing the terror of what happens if I let myself be vulnerable. And maybe I could never express my anger or I could never show that I was afraid. Those emotions got pushed out of conscious awareness as well. And even still here with secondary dissociation, we might have another emotional part. We could go on and on. We could have four or five, but different emotions might get relegated into different parts of us. The part of me that carries my longing for connection, the part of me that carries fear, fight, or flight, and maybe another part of me that carries that submission or shame or an urge to get small and withdraw. You can imagine here that each of these might have different primary nervous system states. Like for my background in polyvagal theory, we might recognize that this emotional part that's carrying my longing or cry for help, the attachment needs are being driven by the part of the nervous system that basically prioritizes social connection for survival. But maybe that part can't actually acknowledge that the person I need to attach to, my caregiver, is also a source of danger. So I have to actually ignore or separate away from the part of me that knows fear. And so there can be this kind of disconnect between two core emotional parts. And the part of me that knows fear cannot even acknowledge the vulnerable part of me that wants to attach to someone that's the source of that fear. So these two actually can't be in the room at the same time, if you want to think about it that way. I'm either in my fear, fight, flight part, or I'm in my attachment, longing part. But the two, they don't talk to each other. They've been kind of relegated to different rooms of the house. And, the internal house, as we're speaking here, although perhaps relegated to different rooms of the actual house in one's history. And then likewise, maybe the emotional part that is carrying some of that submission or shame is carrying a deep shutdown of the nervous system, carrying this parasympathetic dorsal vagal collapse or shutdown, because to actually let myself feel any potential of my own longing or even my fear or my anger has been it has been known to me that that only makes things worse. That leads me to actually be harmed if I express myself in any way. So I've learned to hide all of my feelings. And again, maybe that part that's carrying shame can't acknowledge the part that carries my longing for connection, or can't acknowledge the part of me that feels angry, because that would make the whole situation worse. So we can see this complexity of this internal system. Now, let's look at tertiary dissociation, because even though we have these three subparts underneath the defenses, this is still what we would call secondary dissociation. We have a complex inner system, but basically one world-facing part, one Ariel that's here to greet you, the world. And sometimes when we're working with dissociative identity disorder, or DID, what starts to emerge are multiple world-facing parts, because those two had to be relegated as completely separate. The part of me that I can show to the world, that maybe learned how to be a good student, show up in school, get good grades, be very intellectual, and be very smart. That part has one world facing part. But let's imagine that there's a teenage part. Let's imagine that the teenage part that goes out into the world, gets involved with a particular group of friends. I'm finally accepted by a group of people, but yeah, maybe they're not making the best choices. Maybe I'm not making the best choices when I'm with them. And that becomes another world facing part. And, again, we don't have to stop at two, but, for not making this too complex, this kind of picture is what they would call tertiary dissociation, where we have multiple world-facing parts. And when there's DID, these parts do not acknowledge that the other one exists. And so we can get into all of the nuances of different diagnostics, but I don't think that's really what we need to cover today. I just want you to kind of get a sense of the complexity of a model. And I'm going to just link it to one other model, which is the IFS model. And what I love, and I won't go into great detail about this, especially because we just got to hang out with Frank, and you can learn so much more from Frank Henderson about IFS. But what I will say is that, you know, what's powerful about Dick Schwartz's internal family systems model is that it brings in this concept of self, something that is larger than the sum of all of our parts, if you want to use Gestalt language. It is a quality in a deep spiritual sense, in a deep wholeness sense, that we also have access to the glue that holds all of us together, right? We are not really just all of these component parts that are, sometimes we might feel like there's a part of us flying out into space, but in actuality, there is some essence that is you. There's an essence that is the wholeness of you. And this self often gets described as presence, or this unconditional, non-judgmental essence. Sometimes it gets called the witness, although I don't even know that witness quite captures what it feels like when we're in self energy, because very often self energy also brings in a quality of the heart. It brings in a quality of the ephemeral spirit, something that is sometimes not quite touchable or containable. Dick Schwartz brings in this 8 C's of the self: compassion, clarity, confidence, creativity, courage, calmness, connectedness, and curiosity. And what's stunning about this is that you don't have to have 100% self energy in the room to have self leadership of a session, or to have self leadership within yourself. Even if you just get 10%, 2% of some of that mainland of the secure sense of self, we're going to have a felt experience of what is possible for us. I love to think of self energy as this mainland, this kind of secure self state, where when I have kind of activated that or enlivened that inside of me, or I've spent time with a client for them to get to feel what it feels like to feel, creative, confident, compassionate, clear. grounded. I'll go out of the seas, right? Grounded, present with themselves, hopeful, right? Whatever might be linked to that secure self state, we've got something really important in the room. And the other thing that we know about parts is that sometimes we're not sitting in the mainland of our secure self state. Where we arrive instead is on one of these islands. We're on the island of that attachment longing, or we're in the island of our sympathetic nervous system of fear or fight or flight or anxiety or panic. We're on the island of the feeling of the urge to just give up. What's the point? Nothing's going to make a difference. We're stuck in the island of despair or shame, the urge to hide. And when I'm working with clients and they come into the room and they're living on one of these islands, very often they don't know how they got there, what triggered it, why they have come in feeling caught in the panic, or why they've come in feeling caught in the despair. And that's what we get to start to unpack together. That's where the meaning making and the coherency is so important, because as we unpack what happened this week, and then I kind of go, well, no wonder you're feeling that way. That all makes sense, right? When your husband drank too much and he said that mean thing to you, or when so and so just decided to cut you off and they ghosted you and they didn't text back, whatever it was, well, that makes sense why it would have touched off this feeling. And when we understand our client's history, we understand where these islands came from, basically why they exist for them. So that's also really powerful. But ultimately what our job is to help build boats and bridges. Basically, how do we get from these kind of deserted islands, and how do we get back to that mainland of the secure self state? And not that we always want to live in the secure self state. That's kind of, again, not going to really represent the whole of who we are. What we ultimately want to know is that we can move between different self states pretty fluidly, that we have this capacity to go between that tenderness of the vulnerability of my need for connection, and to also be able to move into the part of me that says, I've got this, or I can hold that part of me with so much compassion right now. Maybe I move toward the part of me that sympathetically carries my anger, and I can express that, or I can finally acknowledge how afraid I was. And I can give voice, or I can give embodiment to that. But at the same time, I've got a really robust orientation to the fact that it's safe enough for me now to feel the anger. It's safe enough for me now to express that fear. And likewise, as we're turning towards the urge to get small, to hide, to collapse, to feel ashamed or helpless, when we turn towards that, can we hold that and not over-identify with it? Can we be with it and know that it's part of us, but it's not all of who I am? And so that becomes this flexible internal system that we're building. When we're inviting an opportunity for parts work, often it begins by identifying what is a part of us coming with us in the room. And sometimes those parts show up as an emotion. Sometimes they show up as a physical sensation. Sometimes they show up as a behavior. Often the parts of us that we're afraid to feel will show up as sensations, whether that's restlessness, irritability, discomfort in your chest, heaviness, a feeling of contraction, or a change in voice tone. And our job is to essentially see if we can become kind of curious about this feeling. Again, bringing in the sea of curiosity. In what ways are these sensations or emotions familiar? Can you imagine that those feelings or sensations were connected to a part of you that felt this way in the past? Maybe you remember specific times that you felt this way. How old does this part of you feel? How do you sense what this part of you may have needed back then? We're going to come back around to those questions in just a moment. But I also just want to name that when we feel a strong sensation from a purely somatic perspective, what Peter Levine would say is that perhaps in relationship to a traumatically stressful moment, something didn't get to complete. Some emotion didn't get to fully express, or some somatic action didn't get to fully complete, didn't get to take action. If you were here for Frank's session, very early on in his slides, he showed this image of basically a completion of a fear response. I feel the fear, I somehow, take action based on the fear. The scary event is over, and I have a felt sense of resolution in body and mind. That would be an ideal outcome. But sometimes we don't get to have that outcome, either because the frightening event doesn't end, it's ongoing, it's chronic, it's repeated. Sometimes, no matter what we did, we couldn't take the action we needed to take to protect ourselves or to reestablish a sense of connection. And Peter Levine refers to these as the thwarted instinct. I couldn't run away. I couldn't push or self protect. I couldn't assert a boundary and say no. I couldn't reach for connection. I couldn't grasp and pull in a resource or call for help. And ultimately, I couldn't experience a deep rest and reset within my body. So, therapeutically, we're also seeking to find a felt sense of completion of the incomplete actions of the past. From a perspective of parts awareness, the invitation becomes to deepen awareness of a part of self. Oh, by the way, just as a slight aside, this photograph, I did not take a picture of the tiger on the last picture, but I did take a picture of the fox. And this fox was taken up in the mountains here in Colorado. We had gone up to have a picnic, and there was a whole family of foxes. And they were completely unfrightened by our picnic activity at the picnic table right next door to the family of foxes. And at one point, this little fox felt so comfortable in our presence that he just laid down on a rock. Literally, it was very easy to take this photo because he was right next to us, laid down on the rock right next to us and took a nap. And I thought, what a blessed moment, right? What a blessing. So perhaps sometimes when we work with our inner parts, we're creating that much safety, that much safety, that the part can finally relax in our presence. Yeah. But very often we are, as we deepen our awareness of a part, we first of all, we want some permission from the part. Like, is it okay to be in relationship to you? Is it okay to explore what you're holding for me? And then we start to ask some questions. How is this experience familiar? Are there memories connected to this feeling? How old does this part feel? I love this particular question. How do you feel toward this part of you? How do you feel toward this part of you? I remember one time many years ago, I'll take this down for a second because it's nice to see your faces. But I was working with a client, and she had brought in a photograph of herself as a 2-year-old. And she pointed to this picture and she said, "Who could love this ugly child?" Right? And that was the internalization that she had. Of course, I look at the photograph and I see a beautiful 2-year-old child. But the message that she got again and again was how unlovable, how unwelcome. This part is so abhorrent. Was truly, I mean, her mother had given her away, and then kind of resentfully took her back, and even the parents that the mother had given her away to were the parents that abused the mother in the first place. There was so much lack of safety around this woman for so many years of her life. And so the wound can be so tender. And once we get in touch with, how do you feel towards this part of you, right? And we hear, who could love this part, or they just bring me down, or they're always going to make life hard for me. We get in touch with what we'll call an introject. What was internalized from the, in this case, abusive caregiver, that the client internalized, and it became a part of them. It became their own internal voice that then gets projected onto a part of self. And so as soon as I hear that there is not self energy coming towards a part, there's not curiosity, there's not compassion, there's not clarity, there's not comfort, there's instead the critic, the meanness, the rejection, I know there's another part in the room, right? And now we know we've got a protector. Now we know we've got an introjected part that, why would we call that even a protector? It's a very interesting frame, but let's talk about it. When what comes up instead is the urge to reject the exiled part, the urge to reject the vulnerable one. Why would we do that? Because the protector says, if I let myself be vulnerable again, I will get hurt again, and I can't risk that. So I would rather join with the meanness, with the control, with the attack, with the self-critic, rather than feel the vulnerability underneath it, because that feels way too, it brings up too much fear. It actually requires, at a very deep, authentic level, it requires enough sense of safe now to really authentically feel how afraid we really were. So we befriend that part enough so that maybe, like the little fox, it falls asleep, or at least it's willing to maybe go more to like your, I'll bring up a childhood animal, but we grew up with a cat. He was named Bogey after Humphrey Bogart. So Bogey was abused in his previous home, and we adopted this beautiful cat. And for, I want to say, like the first month at least that Bogey lived with us, we never saw him. He hid constantly. And we would have to put a little bowl of food out at night. And then at some point in the morning, the food would be gone. And so Bogey would only come out when there was no humans around, and we would eat. But eventually, I was kind of like the cat whisperer, and I would, kind of developed this loving relationship to Bogey, who by the end of I don't know, the end of that first 6 months or so, it happened relatively quickly. Bogey would just like lay down on my body and just let me rub his belly, and so like, that you've got an in with a part at that point. But that wasn't going to happen at first. That wasn't going to happen. We had to really establish this is a safe enough part for you to come, a safe enough place for you to come out of hiding. And eventually to, not scratch and not bite, but to reveal the vulnerable underbelly of who you really are. So back into our parts awareness questions, and we'll do a bit of an experiential with this. So the questions become, what does this part, what do you believe? What do you feel towards the part? Those are going to get in touch with that introjected other. What does this part want you to know? We can add on to these questions. What would you like to be able to feel towards that part now? What would you like to be able to believe about this part of you now? What does this part want you to know? And what do you imagine that this part needs most now? Is it support, protection, to be seen, to hide, to be close, to have space? And we honor that. We honor that. So what we'll go into in practice are actually to be with a part and to do a little bit of these somatic parts work interventions. And you always have option. You may or may not choose to engage in this practice. I've given you a slide that's going to kind of support you if you want to come back to this practice for yourself later, if you want to be a guide to someone else as you take them through a parts working. So we'll do a little bit of this together. And the last slide that I have for you before, the last few slides, and maybe the last slide that I have for you before we go into our practice, is really to view this embodiment practice that we're going to do as a conversation with your body. Right? That you're going to be listening to sensations. This invites you to respond with your breath. You're going to respond with movement, and then ask your body, did I get that right? Let your body give you feedback in the form of emotions or a change in sensation, or maybe it's a sudden overall sense of ease. Notice if there is a tendency to be aggressive with yourself. You can even take over the aggressive part without turning it in towards yourself, because usually the self-aggression is the aggression we didn't get to express outwardly. And I'll say that again when we get into the movement. But ask this part of your body what it needs from you. Rest your attention there. If there's stuckness, wrap your attention around it. And then we're going to bring in curiosity to just keep listening more deeply. So this is how you can stay in touch with me. And I know that Crystal and Mari will put other ways to stay in touch with me into the chat for you. But let's do a little bit of an experiential together. Remember, it's optional. And I'm going to do this standing up because that feels like a good starting point for me today, just to model that therapeutically we get out of the chair. Like we get to work standing. I'm going to move on a yoga mat. You do not need a yoga mat for this practice, but yeah, that's kind of where you'll see me standing. And apparently, I'm also going to have a sip of my tea on my way. Okay, so let's find our way. Find our way into a little bit of an experiential opportunity here. And the first part of this is once again to ask yourself, what is it that you are needing? What is it in you that might be calling for a little bit of love and attention, compassion and care? And because we'll be doing this practice for about 15 minutes, I'm going to very much suggest that you don't work with your worst, hardest, most tender place, right? Just work with something that feels like an accessible layer for you today, an accessible piece to work in about this much time. And I'll invite you to identify a sensation or an area of distress, whether that is physically in your body, an area of discomfort, maybe it's shoulder tension or neck tension or jaw tension or belly, hips. Maybe it's an emotion and the way that that emotion is showing up for you somatically. And maybe it's a recent event. Maybe it's something that happened in the last few days that brings up some lingering feelings for you, lingering somatic experience. Maybe it's a long ago event, and maybe it's even an anticipatory event. Maybe there's something that's coming up that you're scared about, and you want to work with that feeling. So, really, the options, the choices are yours. And as you begin to identify or get some clarity on what it is that you'd like to work with, you might begin to kind of get to know it, get to know how this is showing up for you somatically. You might begin to notice if this emotion or sensation or feeling has a shape. Is there a movement that corresponds with that sensation, that area of discomfort? You might, if it's a specific area of your body, you might bring your hands over this area, send your breath there, send your awareness to it. Is there a shape that represents this? Maybe that shape is something that you take with your whole body, or maybe it's just a shape you take with your arms. Like, like your arms and hands could just express something that is harder to find the shape of with your whole body. Hmm. As you find the shape that matches that feeling, you might also explore for yourself. Is there a memory? Is there uh, a time, an emotion that felt similar to this? Were there needs that didn't get expressed then? If you could give sound or voice to the feeling held in your body. Is there a sound? And you don't have to know what it is. Sometimes we just work with pure sensation and we contract around the sensation. Maybe even your face scrunches up around it. Maybe your voice goes, ah, right? You stick out your tongue. Right? You can find sensation without even having a known associative memory. All of that is welcome. Is there anything as you're listening inward towards maybe a place of contraction? Is there anything it wants you to know? And this next question is going to potentially take you in a little bit of a different direction. This next question is an invitation to imagine how you will feel when this area of challenge or struggle or distress or pain is fully over, when it's fully resolved. What will that feel like? What shape does your body take that matches that sense of this being fully resolved, totally complete, over? Yeah, beautiful. I see some of you shaking, see some of you reaching. Ah, gorgeous. Yeah, yeah. It's over. And you're okay. What would that feel like? Never have to do that again. Never have to go through that one again. It's done. And as you feel that and you take the shape of that, right? You might even imagine that that shape has some quality, some connection to that self-leadership or a sense of wholeness, a sense of empowerment, right? You might find your own words that match that. And I want you to just take your time here to fully absorb it. Like, know that this is also here for you. Lovely. Yeah. And you get to ask yourself whether you want to go to this next place, because the final part of this is to explore a little bit of pendulation between these shapes. And ask yourself, do I want to go back towards that contracted place, or did I feel complete? Or is there maybe some benefit to revisiting, to going back into the contraction, to remembering the pain point, to making space for the emotions? And let your body be the guide here. Yes, there's some value to going back there. There's something else I need to hear or know or listen to or express or give form to, honor. Maybe it's a new shape now, maybe it evolves. And as we pendulate, that means we're going to go back and forth like a pendulum swinging. So the next invitation is to actually go back into your resolution shape or your version of wholeness, expansion, okayness. So we're going to build some bridges and boats. We're going to build the capacity to go between the island of self, that place that carries the pain, the emotion, the sensation, the part that's hard to feel, and the mainland, and the okayness, and the I've got this, or I know what it will feel like when it's resolved. And that's so good to know. And you might go back a few more rounds, finding your way. Let your body guide the way. And remember that this too is a conversation between parts, between your body and your mind. You might also experiment. Is there sound? Are there words? The voice is a portal, right? I really am inviting a little bit of that vocalization. Because the throat is such a key center between body and mind, felt sense and meaning making. And continue to ask your body as you shape into the places of contraction, am I getting it right? Am I listening well? Is there more you need me to know? You might even really explore the transitional movement that takes you from one to the other, from the pain into resolution. And we have another minute or so of exploration, your own version of this. And then when you feel complete, I'll invite you to make your way back. Although that said, you are in your own time space. So if you want to keep going with this, that too is welcome, right? You are in charge. And before we come into some opportunity for exchange and Q&A and so forth, I would love to invite you to take a moment to turn inward. A little bit of, as one of my mentors would call this, body fullness. She reclaims the word mindfulness as a form of body fullness, and her name is Christine Caldwell. She has a book of that title. Body fullness, that as we awaken the sensory channels through movement and sound, we're kind of lighting up the brain's ability to sense the body, the mind's ability to sense the body. And in this place of body fullness, what is here for you? And my hope is that there's just a little bit more wholeness, a little bit more of you available for you. Thank you for engaging with me in a practice. And
So there's some questions in the Q&A.
beautiful, right? So we can go into our heads with a theoretical question, but I would love to just start with like, how is that practice? Like, what did that what arose to the surface?
Hi. Also, sorry, my name is Shelby. I
Shelby.
didn't know how to put my name up there. But yeah, to answer your question, a little bit of that experience, like, wow, mind blowing. So kind of my experience was I noticed this pain in my back and kind of the emotion that was coming up with that or the feeling was just this tiredness and there's a lot of like chronic exhaustion that I experience. And I realized through like when we were initially going through, okay, locating that part, feeling that part, what is something that that part is trying to show you. I had this memory of being with my best friend, and it was after like a harsh breakup, and I had been through I was working at a camp, and so it was like 6 weeks without a day off, and I was completely and totally exhausted and
Mm,
spent. And I remember just kind of sitting with her and expressing everything where I was at and really needing that attunement, really needing her to feel what I was feeling.
mm,
And she was able to do that for a little while, but it was also late at night, and she's like, "Hey, like I'm really exhausted. I got to get up in the morning." And you know, that's no fault of her own. Like she's speaking up for her needs, but the disappointment that was there
yeah.
and almost feeling somewhat of abandonment on top of abandonment and feeling like I just needed like and I was so exhausted at the point where like my eyes were swollen. It's like 2 o'clock in
Mm,
the morning. I need to go to bed, but I just can't go to bed. And I'm like barely staying awake, but yet also in the midst of this intense emotional experience. And so it was crazy to me, first of all, that
mhm.
that memory even came up just in focusing on that area of my body.
Wow. Wow.
And
And Shelby, can I ask another question? Um, did you feel that turning towards that felt experience of when this is all resolved or when this is complete, did you feel some sense of now being able to attend to that missing experience that happened that time, like that you could bring in the attunement that that part of you so
yes,
deeply needed? Oh,
yes, like I was attuning to myself.
yeah.
And then it was just really crazy feeling like basically I'm laying on the floor to kind of give you a little bit more of a picture. I'm laying on the floor, diaphragmatic breathing, focusing on my back, and then I feel this need to like shake my arms, almost like I'm holding a bat,
Mm,
but above my head and just needing to shake and shake. And then all the tears just
mhm,
start coming. And then when we move to that more like, um, in EMDR language, like positive cognition
mhm.
of what would this be like if it's totally resolved, and then feeling like starfish and super expansive, you know?
Love it.
It was just an incredible experience, and
Oh,
I think the biggest takeaway I have from that is just that somatic insight and just how that memory came up, just focusing on my body. Like, I've never experienced
wow.
anything like that before, so it was
Wow.
incredible. Thank you.
You're so welcome, Shelby. Thank you for your share. I appreciate it so much. Yeah. All right, let's take another one here from Tricia. Hello.
Thank
Oh.
you for that very short but powerful practice.
Mhm,
It was so gentle. The invitation to go there was so gentle,
mm,
and it. I haven't had that invitation to go
mm,
from one to the other. Um, I have been in the shame, urge to hide because I lost the last decade my significant attachment relationships, my mother, my father, my sister, my marriage, my mother-in-law, my health, just things just disintegrated. And so my posture, also had 2 back surgeries, so very rounded, very hidden.
mm,
And then when we went into the wait, what is it like when this is
mm,
resolved? And I had the memory of being a child and having that unbridled joy and movement, and my arms were moving and I was open, and
mm,
like the sun was shining. And it's like, oh
mm.
my God, I remember what that was like. And then to pendulate back to it a little bit, go, oh, this has been my familiar stance
Wow.
in the last decade. This is
Yeah.
not where I want to live anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
This, that mainland self energy, no one's coming to
Mm,
save me.
mm,
Like this is
mm.
sensing this in my own body and the movement back and forth. It's like, oh, okay, here's the work
Yeah.
right here for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. And even in your share, Tricia, your ability to be with the emotional experience of this, and to let that move through you, right? We can hear it in your voice, and that it's not taking you just into shutdown. It's like allowing the both to be part of you as that facilitation of this wholeness. Wow. Mm.
I just got this visual of being a TheraBand.
Yeah, totally. I've got one right over here.
Remember that when I'm like this, I can TheraBand myself out, like work with
Totally.
myself that way. Yeah.
Man, do I really relate to that. Now I really am grabbing my TheraBand, because there's something so powerful about that, because very often, and this is a super, super hard one, but like sometimes that feeling of like, oh gosh, stretching open feels so effortful when I've been in that contraction for 10 years or for so long, right? Like, oh, that feels so hard. And I think it's such a beautiful example too, because Peter Levine talks about this of like, we don't want to necessarily do like the rubber band thing where we open up too much too fast and then it just goes into contraction. And that's where the pendulation gets to come in, that we can open and close and open a little bit more. And oh, I got to feel that stretch. And then I get to go here because it's safe. So thank you. I'm glad I got to
Yeah.
grab this.
Yes. Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
thank you. Thank you. I'm enjoying taking the shares. Crystal, let's toss one. Maybe there's like a summary of a few questions or like a theme showing up in the Q&A. Let's toss one of those, and then I'll take a few more shares.
Let's see here. How would you use pendulation practices with a client who is in an extreme state of hyper and hypoarousal? That looked like a popular question that was coming up for folks.
Cool. Um, so and in some ways, I feel like that's exactly what I was just speaking to, and I still have my TheraBand here, but like there's a way in which if we are working with ourselves or someone else that's in more of an extreme state, sometimes the pendulation is to find just a tiny little bit of moving away from the extreme state. So it's almost like, I'll give it a different example here, but I was working with someone who's really been dealing with a lot of insomnia, a lot of chronic inability to kind of like let go at night, waking up at 2 in the morning, and the mind is just boom, 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 like off to the races, right? And we were talking about this very vigilant part of her that's kind of running the show and running lots going on in her life, lots tracking, and so like it felt too scary to completely put down the vigilance. That feels like way too much too fast. So what we explored is like, could we just drop like 5% of the vigilance? And I'm holding the pillow. We're on Zoom together and I'm holding the pillow and having her do that as well, picking up something to hold and press and squeeze. And maybe we just let go of that squeeze that's representing the vigilance, 5% or 10%. And that felt safe enough, right? And so likewise, if we're working with the flip side of the hypoarousal, maybe we just explore what would be just the tolerable amount of mobilization for the system, wiggling fingers, wiggling toes, turning the head, turning the gaze, making a little bit of social connection. All of those would be mobilizations, hands around a tender sensation, send your breath there, where it's not like I'm going to go up and I'm going to shake and push the wall, but I'm going to do a little bit of mobilization and back into collapse and a little bit. So the pendulation becomes very much the key to working with any state, including an extreme state. All right, let's take Batul. Am I going to pronounce your name right? And please correct me.
Hi. Yeah, Beatrice. Here I
Hi.
am. Hi.
You. Hello.
You too. Thank you so much. I enjoy all you generously share so much. And yeah, thank you for this session. Mine is probably less in the emotional land and more in the something physical I really needed today.
Mm-hmm.
Usually more emotional memories come up, but I had a fall last week and I hit my knee But for some reason, like my neck and my shoulder have been aching. So I just like held it and I could feel my body like curling. And I realized, oh, I'm trying to go down again.
Wow.
And when that happened, I was holding my precious, didn't catch myself.
Mhm.
This time I caught myself and I really held myself. The muscles I felt are the muscles that have been aching, the neck and shoulder. And I was like, whoa, that was yeah, that was just so interesting. So I just held myself and I could feel those muscles engaging.
Mhm.
And then I went into a state of ease and safety where I'm like being held, like supported. And I went back to it and
Mm.
behold, it feels better on my neck and my shoulder. Yeah, so
I got
um
goosebumps as you shared that story.
mm,
It's such a powerful example of I didn't get to because I was holding this precious thing. I couldn't do the thing that I needed to do to protect myself, and you got to reenact the whole thing with the engagement of the muscles, so the muscles are
mhm,
no longer holding the urge to complete that. That's phenomenal.
mhm.
Oh, thank you so much for your share. It's very touching. Oh,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you. Thank you. All righty. I am aware of time. I appreciate you being here, and I look forward to the next time we get to connect.